And so the idea was to change the world and make it a better place. All things which sounded really good. And so they did things like introduce medical care hundreds of years earlier than it normally would have been, introduce technology earlier than it should have been, and things like that. And so over time, they start doing more and more to change the world, but they don't take into account important things like if you provide modern medical care hundreds of years earlier, well, then less people are going to die as early, which means there's going to be an increased strain on food supplies worldwide, which, since you're not fixing that problem, is going to lead to things like global famine. And they end up making a really huge mess of things.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. Today I'm here with Christopher Coates. Christopher grew up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and moved to Michigan in the late 80s to attend Davenport University's paramedic school. A retired firefighter-paramedic, he now lives in Kent City, Michigan, and works full-time in information systems for a major West Michigan company. In his off time, he enjoys family time, traveling to unique places, and his two dogs who keep life fun. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
So you were my second guest on the show ever, and I wanted to thank you for you taking the chance to be a guest on a podcast that basically had just started and didn't have any real listeners at the time. So thanks for that. I enjoy talking to all my guests, of course, and this is the 51st episode, but the people in the first season really have a special place in my heart. So definitely want to thank you for that.
Oh, that's great.
And I wanted to thank you again for reaching out this time with your new book, which we'll get into shortly. But when we last spoke, we talked primarily about your apocalyptic book, Arc. While we waited for the second lockdown of COVID the COVID pandemic to hit upon us. And this was shortly after a period of significant political upheaval in both the US and the UK, which for some, the pandemic was kind of it seemed like the end of the world take two, after the whole events of sort of 2016 election and things like that. But things have gotten even worse as we move through the 20s. So there's still a chance your ARC book is going to be prophetic. We'll see that in a few years. Hopefully not, but we'll see. But so now that the Western world seems to be in chaos and possibly our empire is falling, just wanted to say, how are you doing now?
I'm doing quite well. I'm busy working and having a lot of fun writing.
Living your best life in the apocalypse. Good.
Yeah. Nothing's burning around me yet.
As I was just going to ask, how are things in Kent City then?
It's a small rural farming community, and so we're very away from a lot of the commotion that you hear about in the news. Things are relatively smooth and stable.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because it's like, I think what you guys sort of experience is like what we have here. A lot of chaos in London, for example. Likewise with you guys in New York. But I think both of us are removed from that to a degree. So we see some changes happening maybe, but nothing violent, no violence or anything like that.
No, nothing at all anywhere near here.
Yeah. I swear that Kent City sounds like it should be the setting for a superhero story. Have you ever thought about writing a superhero story set there?
There are less than 3,000 people in the community, so it would be a pretty boring story.
You could elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, it's a cool name for a city, for a town.
When I first moved to the state of Michigan, I saw the signs for it, and I was aware of it and thought maybe it must be something. And the first time I came up here, I was like, it's just lots of apple trees and cornfields.
Well, it sounds like Smallville then. Maybe that's why it's named Kent City.
But that's exactly what we were looking for, a nice quiet place away from all that type of commotion to raise a family. And so, it's a very nice community.
Yeah, no, it is great to get out of the big cities for that. We're quite happy where we are raising our family here as well. They're just those smaller places seem a bit nicer for that kind of thing, don't they?
Absolutely.
So it almost feels like we're living in our own novel at the moment. I don't know. You guys are coming up to election this year. We're coming up to an election this year. Um, it feels like that politics is almost a scripted reality show these days. Have you but you haven't seen like the have you well, we have seen changes in our town because all around they're building like crazy in England for some reason. But it hasn't really hit you there then in terms of
Not a lot. Political choices drive, things that we have to, endure. Uh, Prices change, everything gets more expensive, jobs become less available, housing is much more expensive. So you're going to feel that everywhere. But
yeah.
as far as a lot of the commotion and the stuff that people are reading in the news, we have the fortunate, you know, situation where we're removed from a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so, so with all this chaos, and I'll get onto um your books in a short time here, but so you were a paramedic, which I actually remember you saying was less stressful than the IT in some ways, which I thought was quite funny.
In some ways, because there's an awful lot of downtime. And so, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. If it weren't for the working hours and scheduling and stuff, I'd still be doing it. I love that kind of work. But fortunately, moving to IT was something else I enjoyed, and I'm very happy where I am. So I was fortunate. I've never been one of those people that dreads going to work.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. With your paramedic background, have you been prepping at all for the craziness? Not necessarily doomsday prepping, but just getting stuff ready in case.
No, I keep my ear to the ground, but I don't have a bunker in my basement. I haven't, stocked up on canned foods or bottles of water or anything like that. So I just keep listening and seeing, I wonder if it's going to ever get to that. I hope not. It's hopefully that stuff will remain the great topic for fiction stories only. But
Yes, yes.
you have to wonder with some of the stuff we're hearing.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, but we can keep our fingers crossed, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so moving on to your writing. So from paramedic, IT, just could you just maybe summarize your path to writing, how you got into science fiction writing?
My father was a writer. Um, he wrote a lot of commercial copy type stuff over his years, and he tried writing a few books. And I don't know if that motivated me or not, but for years, growing up, I had ideas in my head, and it took years before I finally decided that all right, let's try to write something. And so I didn't gradually work up to this. I sat down one day and said, all right, we're going to write a book. I never did short stories. I never did anything, after school. And so my first book was The Ark, and that was the first thing I really wrote that wasn't some type of an assignment. And so it took a long time to write it, but it was very, very enjoyable.
So were you still a paramedic when you were writing that one?
I was doing some of that part-time on the side, but I had made my full-time transition to information systems.
All right, okay. And so now I mean, you've got 7 books under your belt now. Have you got into a bit of a writing routine, or is it sort of each one's really new and a new experience?
Each one's different. I'm not one of these people that focuses on I've got to spend a certain amount of time each day writing, or that's not how I work. If I did that, then writing would stop being fun. It would be a chore that I had to accomplish, and that's not, for me, this is something that's enjoyable. So I do it when I have time, and there may be, a period of time when, I'm a certain place in the book and I'm really not sure where I want to go with it next. So it sits for maybe a few weeks, and then an inspiration hits, and then I take off and write 10,000 words in a couple of days and I'm all excited. But so it kind of goes back and forth
So do you work to a sort of longer like a publishing deadline, or is it really just whenever it's ready?
whenever it's ready. I
Yeah.
send it, I'll send it into my publisher when it's ready. The last book I wrote, it took me a while, it gets to the point where I have to decide, okay, this story is done. And, and that's when I start, finishing it up and getting it submitted.
All right. I was curious then. How many edits do you do? Do you sort of edit as you go, or do you sort of write it through once and then go
I
back and
I do rough editing as I go because, to get the blatant, obvious stuff, and then I use different, you know, editing tools at the end and get it as polished as I can, and then I submit it to my publisher, who then puts it through their editing process.
right? So when you say editing tools, I assume you mean like grammar checkers and spell checkers and
Things
make
like
sure it's
that.
clean
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And I noticed you haven't really written in any series, which is interesting for independent authors. You do have some that are like duologies and things like that. And I
Yeah.
think the current one we'll be talking about, Shattered Time, will be a series, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
The
yeah,
arc does have a second book in that series. That's a short 2-book series. I
right.
never intended there to be a second book, but I got so many reviews, saying they wanted more, that I wrote a second. And I've left a number of my books in a state where I could do another book if I decide. Alternate Purpose is a great example of that. I've thought of doing a third one in the series with the Ark and the Anvil. Um, there are a number of them there. I've left that as a possibility in case I choose to go back and do that sometime.
Right. Um, being IT especially, have you incorporated AI in any of your writing or routines or
I've
inspirational
I've
sides?
looked at some AI tools, and there are a lot of places that say, these AI tools can write for you, but I don't want something to write for me. That's what I'm here to do. I
Right.
want it to be my content. Now, I'm more than happy to use AI related tools for things like editing and cleaning things up and finding, errors that might, I don't want, or pointing things out, for that type of thing. But I certainly don't want a tool that's going to create content for me.
Right, yeah. I've been exploring a few of the main ones to see what they can do writing wise. I haven't got them to anything that sounds like it would be reasonable anyway. I don't know if some of the specialized ones might be more reasonable, but
Yeah,
what I find them useful for really is uh world building to a degree, and maybe character development, backstory, getting ideas for things like that. It's quite useful, yeah. But yeah, I like you. It's like, okay, if I just plug it into the book, then it would have to be like something that I don't really care about that much, and I just want to throw it out
yeah,
there or something under a
it's hard
pseudonym.
to take pride in your work if a computer's writing it for you.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I recently saw an article that suggested that let's say copywriters who are using AI to write the copy are willing to accept lower salaries, most likely because they know they're not doing the work themselves.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
would I would I would envision people wanting this, trying to use that on the backside so that they can still make the money and not
Yeah, it's
admitting it.
interesting. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, we're in an interesting time with AI, seeing how it develops. You haven't
It
used
is.
that or aren't aware of it being used for any of your covers or anything like that, because I do a lot of use with images with the AI.
Oh, my publisher does all of my cover design for me. I do not know what tools they have. I give them information about my story. I give them the ideas of what I would like to see in a cover, and then they come up with some options for me, and then we just go from there.
That's
So
cool.
what tools they're using to create them, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was very happy with what they did in my last book, Shattered Time. I thought that was a great cover.
Yeah, it's quite a nice cover. Yeah. And your publisher, you're publishing with Next Chapter, is that right?
Yes, and it's chapter publishing.
So how do you find them? Are they fairly new? They do have quite a number of authors under them now, seems
Yeah,
like.
they do. I'm not sure when they started, but I've been with them since around 2015.
Oh,
When
okay. Wow.
I
Not
first
that long.
finished the arc around 2008, and I submitted it to a lot of different publishers, and never really, I had trouble finding anybody of any interest. Because I was new, it was my first book. It was really kind of difficult, and I actually met somebody on a plane, and we're flying from Texas home, and we started talking, and he said, "You ought to check out this company that I've been using." And it was a different name, but they changed and morphed into Next Chapter. And so I actually was able to get in with them and have been very happy. They definitely took me from the self-published step to, a slightly higher level. So that's nice.
And so I was wondering with them, so what is their model? Because there's a huge number of different models out there these days, from hybrid publishing to paid done for you kind of thing, etc. And the traditional publishing model. Are they sort of like they take royalties like a traditional company would, and then they just do all the work for you basically?
Yes. And so I don't pay them anything. You hear about some of these places that anybody can get in with, and you pay them a ton of money to publish a book for you. But in this case with Next Chapter, I don't pay them for anything. They pay me based on royalties, but they also take a slightly larger cut
Hmm.
because they're doing the editing, the cover design, the marketing, all those things that, in a different case, I'd be paying for out of pocket. And so my royalties are smaller, but I prefer that model
Yeah. So do
where
they
I'm not
do
writing.
right? Do they do good marketing then? Because that is one of the places where quite often the smaller, well, even the larger ones, presses fall apart sometimes.
It's hard for me to know. There's so many different markets, and they, get me out there in to a lot of them, and I know I'm having sales in them, and I get sales reports showing how my sales are in Canada and Australia and places. So I can't really say how much they're doing compared to some other places. I always wish they were doing more because they can't possibly be doing too much.
Right.
Uh, but I think they're doing a good job.
Oh, good, good. And I noticed they advertise on their website at least as an author community. Is that something that's well developed? Do you communicate with a lot with the other authors that they publish, or is it not so much?
There's a little bit of communication, over social media. Like Next Chapter has a couple of Facebook pages for different groups, and through some other people other authors have created groups like on other online platforms where Next Chapter authors can kind of get together and communicate a little bit. It's not a lot of that, but a little bit.
Right. Okay. And one other thing I noticed was that because I did your first book, I did listen to the audiobook through Audible for that. And for Shattered Time, there isn't one yet, I don't think.
No, there's
Is there
not.
is there plans for that or?
I have put in the request for it, and usually it takes about a year or so for that to happen. Of my 7 books, 5 of them have audio at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And
I
so,
noticed that most of them did, yeah, so I was curious. So do they work through the ACX model or do you know or find a way
yes,
or okay.
yep, they work through ACX.
All right, cool. So I mean, we are here to talk about largely Shattered Time, which is your latest book.
Yeah,
That was published in March this year, wasn't it?
March of this year. Yeah.
March, yeah. So
And since it
congratulations
fell
on that
into
one.
that science fiction genre, I thought about you and decided to reach out.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm always happy to talk about books of guests I've had on previously. So I wonder if you could first just give us a quick non-spoiler overview of the story, and then so I can sort of frame my questions around which parts not to talk about.
So the idea behind Shattered Time is we've got people who have developed the ability to go back in time. And once they developed it, they were kind of stuck as to what do we do with it now? And the business they had built around creating this technology was running out of money because there was no revenue, and the grants they had received were drying up, and here they had this wonderful technology, and they decided, what do we do with it? And so the idea was to change the world and make it a better place. All things which sounded really good, and of course they were going to make some money along the way. And so they did things like introduce medical care hundreds of years earlier than it normally would have been, introduce technology earlier than it should have been, and things like that. And so over time, um, they start doing more and more to change the world, but they don't take into account important things like if you provide excellent medical or modern medical care hundreds of years earlier, well, then less people are going to die as early, which means there's going to be an increased strain on food supplies worldwide, which, since you're not fixing that problem, is going to lead to things like global famine. And they end up making a really huge mess of things. And so, without going into it too much, there is an outside group that becomes aware of the mess they've made of the planet, of how they basically, the term that I use is that they reshuffled the deck on human history, going back hundreds of years. And they realize that something needs to be done to change it. And so genetically modified people are sent back. It's a group of teens, genetically modified, are sent back to the time when these experiments were happening to put a stop to them. At the same time, people from the future who have been greatly benefited by all of these changes want to keep them from, resetting things as they should be. And so there ends up being a big clash between timelines about those who want the changes to the timeline to remain and those that want to reset them to what they should be. And so that is the premise of the story.
Almost feels like you're setting up your own multiverse war there.
Almost, but on a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
But
What was the inspiration for this story that, or what was it that caused you to write this particular one?
I had the idea of, these things just come into my head and sit there. And this one was there for a long time, and I started writing it, but it got to the point where I was like, the incredible vast number of changes and things that could be completely messed up by even a small change, in history. Now you make massive changes, how huge those could be was just almost, was mind blowing. And so it took me a while to get my mind around how I was going to handle and manage that. And so I wrote a third of the book, and then I kind of put it aside, and then I wrote a different book, which was published, before, a few years ago, kind of giving me time to work through how I was going to address, just the sheer number of, differences that were going to happen.
Because yeah, and well, again, I'll try not to do any spoilers, but you have a completely different geopolitical landscape in the altered timeline, which
Yes,
is where
drastically.
well, so that's where the conflict comes in when that future, that timeline realizes that someone is trying to reset it, basically, don't they? Back to the way
Yes.
it was, and they're going to
Yeah,
not exist anymore.
everything, yeah, if you put it back, then they wouldn't, have the power that they do. And it's the interesting thing about it is, those people that are trying to prevent the world from being reset to the way it should be, to the way it would be without time travel, they, in some minds, are the bad guys, but they really aren't. They're really just, protecting their history, their nation, their way of life from being eradicated. And so there is no evil side in this, in a way. It's basically, it's two existing forces with extremely vast, different goals and needs, trying to fight for their own survival.
Yeah, and then that's the way these things work, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so one thing is that the let's say the party that invented the time travel. So the way you described it was they had good intentions to go back and altruistically adjust time. That wasn't their only motivation at some point, was it? They had a more financial motivation at
Oh
some
yeah,
point. Yeah.
yeah, that was also part of it, because you could take goods and services from your time back hundreds of years, thousands of years, and trade those, and they'd be very valuable. But in doing so, you alter the past,
Yeah,
which means you alter the future.
it's weird that they didn't seem to process that. Did you write them so that they had the view that maybe, they will just take a couple things back and then they won't be able to repeat this? They'll kind of not understand how that works, and then we'll just
Yeah,
get
and
rich
in the
off of this.
first few times that they did things like that, when they went back in time, they intentionally traded things that they didn't think would have much of an impact. And, then, that ended up not being the case.
Right. They underestimated the ingenuity of ancient
Right.
peoples. Yeah. Um, actually I wanted to touch on this group that was in there as well, because I don't think it's a spoiler, because it comes in from the prologue. So this would be the other group you mentioned. And I don't know how much you want to say about them, but presumably in the future books you're going to sort of get into their role, and what their role is in this. Do you envision these consequential changes for Earth then rippling out into the galaxy as well?
Yes. The whole reason they exist is I needed to have something outside of the timeline that could know that there was something wrong and decide to take action. And so I never wanted to have a an off-world species, you know, in my story. I don't while I write sci-fi, I don't write about aliens and spaceships and things like that. But they were necessary in order to be able to have, somebody, from that could see from the outside that there was a problem that needed to be addressed. And so I'm not sure how I might use them in the future, but they fit very well into the story.
Did you have it planned for multiple? I mean, obviously there's another book in the series. How many do you have in mind at the moment?
I'm considering a second one, but I don't know at this
Okay.
point. I'm not really sure where I'm going to go with that.
Okay. Because yeah, there's definitely a lot of I mean, the story wraps up. I don't want to give people the wrong impression, but there are enough bits at the end to definitely inspire another story, I would say. Yeah.
I definitely like to give myself options.
Yeah, that's for sure. So the one thing that came to my mind while I was reading this was that I was thinking, did the author of this story have in mind, like, were they inspired by the idea of a reset button, right? Like things get so messed up in your current timeline that you can go back and reset the timeline. That's just something that came to my mind.
Which is really what it was. It kind of was a reset by eliminating the ability to ever go back in time to begin with.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. But so
That's
so that leaves me to the question of how do you view I guess time travel in this universe of yours within your story, because I mean there's multiple ways of looking at time travel. You have multiple timelines, which it's uncertain kind of how they're related, but I think well, I don't want to give anything away at the end, but you have multiple timelines. And so I guess that's an open-ended question, but how do you see the time travel working? Is causality based? Is it sort of branching timelines? It's a bit of both.
so Shattered Time is my fourth book that's time travel, or my third book that's time travel related. The one I'm working on now will be the fourth one. And for me, when I look at time travel, it has always been basically that time is linear. I don't go to the whole, multiverse options and things like that too much. For the most part, you've got time and it travels in one direction normally. And so if you make a change by going backwards, you change everything going forward. And so in some ways, maybe it's a more simplistic way of looking at time than, what Marvel's done. But at the same time, I also really think that's more likely that would be the reality to me. And so that allows me to do, it gives me a framework within which to write and to plan for. So, if we go back in time and we eliminate a certain person from history, you know, everything going forward is going to be without them and without their offspring and their offspring's offspring and anything they invented or did, and so in some cases it won't make much of a difference at all. That's kind of sad for those in those cases, because that means that person really and their generations beyond didn't do much, but others will have a catastrophic change.
Right. Do you worry about causality in that particular? Because that's always, I mean, in that particular perspective, the weakness, of course, is causality when you go back and you, let's say, kill your own grandfather, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, because my version of that particular one would be that the universe has already sorted this out, so there might be loops within loops of the timeline, but eventually it will have sorted itself out at some point, um, in I don't know, in the future or at the end of the present or whatever you might.
In one of my books, my first time travel story, The Resurection Wager, they discuss that and plan for that and what would happen. And it was one of those things that it was like, we better not figure this out because who knows, we better not test this out because we're not sure what we could do and what the damage could be. And that's the only one where we really address it a lot. But at the same time, in a story like Shattered Time, you could easily see how some of the changes that were made and the lives that were disrupted could easily have impacted and removed the people who developed the time travel technology from history so that they never even existed or were born. And then you've got that kind of situation.
Right. Because, yeah, exactly. Because what I'm thinking is also like from the point, again, I'm trying to not give things away in the story, but you have a future, a present, and past basically in your story. And let's say something happens to the time travel people that stops them from traveling from the present anymore. So I'm
Hmm.
alluding to your story, but yeah. So
Yeah,
then whatever changes were made up to that point, would that not reset the
you
future
would.
timeline? What I'm thinking
Or
is, would it not then, so that new timeline that was now the future timeline, would that not be cemented perhaps in place?
and I addressed that a little bit as in if somebody makes a change, goes into the past and makes a change, and then they go forward, even if maybe they made it so that they don't exist, as they go forward and return to that time, they're still there because they were the ones transitioning the timeline. So they're still there, they still exist, even if they find that their family doesn't was never born. And in my new book, that situation actually happens. They come back and arrive home, and completely different people live there, and all their equipment they use for developing time travel is gone. And they can't even find out what happened because the world's such a different place. And they have to figure out, okay, here we are, and we've got our time machine, for lack of a better term. Uh, what in the world are we going to do now? Because, we really don't exist in
Yeah.
this world.
Yeah, because that's what I'm thinking. Let's say you've already mentioned the future people that go back because they feel they realize someone was tampering with it. Their timeline from the interruption of time travel to their future would now be cemented as the actual timeline potentially.
See, that's why I like time travel is you can go so many different directions with it.
Yeah, yeah. Because sometimes there have been some stories in the last few years, I think Netflix, Hollywood-based stories that just sort of don't even they within the story they just say, oh well, there's no point in thinking about this because it's too complex. They just give themselves a way out that way, right?
And you can skip it and not talk about it and get away with it like that to a degree, but to some degree, it's cheating. By
Yeah,
just ignoring things that are going to be blatant to your reader, and so you
yeah,
have to at least address it to some, to a reasonable degree.
yeah. I think it's cheating. A lot of. Well, I think it depends on what your focus on the story is, but someone like me definitely considers it cheating as well if when they do it in those stories. Yeah.
But
Um.
there's with time travel, there are always so many different directions, nuances, however you want to look at it, that it's really hard to plug all the holes.
Yeah, because I mean, I interviewed an author who did a time travel book where it was the basically a person would move back in their mind would move back into a past version of themselves and kind of take it over.
Yeah,
So a kind of a holographic mind version, which was
sure.
a strange
Different
version as well.
different way of
Yeah.
looking at it.
Yeah. I was wondering, because you mentioned, I mean, you do have two other time travel books, A Resurrection Wager and Alternate Purpose. And it occurred to me, have you ever thought about something like alternate purpose being in part of this universe?
Oh, somehow connecting them.
Yeah.
They've really worked. The storylines, the time travel technology, everything just works so very differently. And see, that's one of the reasons why with this new one that I'm writing now, I'm not sure I'm going to write anything time travel for a while after that because I've gone down several different avenues, and I don't want to write something that seems like it's the same kind of thing.
Do you feel it's very easy to burn out on time travel? It just requires so much mental manipulation to keep things
I
sorted and everything.
I think there are times when you need to take a break from it for sure. After you know, alternate purpose, I took a break and I wrote two books that aren't at all sci-fi related. They're just thrillers. And they were a lot of fun. I enjoyed writing them, but by the time I got done with the second one, I was ready to go back and write some time travel.
So it seems there's something about time travel that calls to you after a while.
I enjoy it because you can do a lot of weird things with it. You can take it in directions you were never planning. You have a lot of freedom to just go places that you wouldn't with a regular thriller.
Right. And you do tend to keep your stories fairly contemporary. I mean, when they start anyway, and I would say mundane. That's not in any kind of derogatory way. What I mean is um nothing too expansive into the universe generally, or space saga type stuff. Is that intentional? Sort of keep it down to earth, as it were. I mean, you do
when I
have,
when I talk to people about my books, and they especially when they see the cover for the Ark and the Anvil, they
mm,
automatically assume that it's got to do with outer space and traveling to outer space and stuff like that, which it certainly doesn't. And so for the longest time, I told people, I said, I don't write about outer space, I don't write about aliens, and then all of a sudden I write Shattered Time, and there's the need to have a very small, and I keep them as minimal as possible, but these guys from another planet are kind of needed. And so I use them and I'm thinking, I always said I don't use aliens. I don't do that. But we had to have them briefly, involved. And so I don't know. Will I someday write about space travel? I don't know. I feel like it's just been done so many times in so many different ways that I don't know.
have you, I mean, you put them in as a minimal part of the story. Did you flesh them out at all, or are they just sort of as much as needed for the story?
I I put them in minimal. I did them as much as was needed for the story, but at the same time, I still spent the time creating them and their world so that they were interesting and different, without being without looking like they were going to be like, the main, part of the story. I
Right.
worry when people read Shattered Time that they're going to read that prologue where we see them and they're going to think that, oh, I'm not interested in alien stories, and I'm like, it's not, but yeah, there they are in the prologue, and so it's like, no, that's not what this is about. We see them a couple of times, but that's it.
Yeah, when I admit when I started reading it, I found it a little bit strange at the beginning. And partly was because I was like, "Whoa, this is weird. Like, what are these guys doing here?"
Yeah,
And then the story itself moves, without again trying not to give any spoilers, it moves through different groups at different stages within the book, which was an unusual style, I thought.
I
Um,
I like to move. I like to do that. I've done that within a few of my other stories where alternate purpose does that too, where they're different. You're seeing different angles, of the story, different timelines, happening and going forward, and I, I think that keeps it interesting.
it almost felt like you Game of Thrones one of the groups for a moment. Like, um, let's say the ones that went back to whatever she was trying to do. Um, was that I thought, well, oh, has he got inspired by Game of Thrones to start killing off some of his characters, or
No, but there came a point though where they had to be dealt with. And so that kind of just, that just kind of, there needed to be a solution and they weren't going to take any other options. And so they had to be removed.
So one thing that was noticeably different in this book, and so I've mostly read the two books of yours, which is Arc and Shattered Time. And in the Arc, which was your first book, as you mentioned, you went into a lot of detail about the development of the technology
Hmm.
that was meant to preserve humanity from the asteroid. Um, and so from some point of view, it was like kind of a technical story, I
Yeah,
suppose, versus something like Shattered Time, where you could have done that potentially had you wanted to, but you spent a lot more time on the actual sort of the dramatic part of the story. Um, what I mean, I guess I mean sort of action-oriented part of the story. Um,
right.
is that was presumably was that intentional? Was that a transition you found yourself making as an author as you've sort of developed in your writing style, or?
I have spent time in other time travel stories writing about more of the technology and how they make things go, and I worry that it's going to get too redundant, and uh, people who've read the other books are going to lose interest because of that. So I really didn't want to focus on that in Shattered Time. It was really to focus on the situation, and how things were being handled. So we talk about it, we understand the technology to a point, but we don't dwell on it. At the same time, somebody who goes and reads the Ark and then goes and reads Shattered Time, they may not even realize that they're written by the same author, because I had never written anything before I wrote the Ark. And while it came out very good and gets great reviews, my writing style has changed, in the 15 years, since I wrote the Ark, and between then and, what I'm writing now, since, it was the first thing I wrote, I've developed different ways of doing things.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. Yeah. Um, I keep coming back to the idea of the sequels because in my head, a story like this would spin off into a huge series. And I was a little surprised you're thinking only to write one more. You feel you can wrap it up in one more story?
I don't know. I really haven't spent a lot of time thinking about another book in that series. I left myself the opportunity to, but I've been focused on the new book that I'm writing now. It's time travel, but it's not at all related. And so there'll come a point when I'm ready to start thinking about where I want to go, if I, with another book and the whole Shattered Time series.
That's interesting because when you mentioned you were writing another time travel, and I immediately assumed it was the sequel for this one. Um, so because you said after this current time travel book you're writing, you're probably going to take a break again. So it'll be a little while potentially before you
It's
come back to
it's
this
gonna
one.
it's gonna all depend on what pops into my mind.
Yeah.
I was doing a home project a couple falls ago here, and I was doing, just some work, and something happened, and I don't want to go into it, but with what I was working on, and it gave me an idea and something to think about. And it was just that little bit of an idea. And I started writing, within, a week or so of starting to think about that. And it turned into my book, A Brother's Obsession. And so, I never know when something's going to pop into my head that I'm going to think about and say, I can do something with this. Some of them have come up just very suddenly from something very small, and then my mind twists it and works it and comes up with some ideas.
So one other thing I noticed because so I think if I was and I actually have a series that it's not time travel, but it involves an attempt at time travel that goes wrong. But my own interest in would be in sort of I don't know creating an explanation for let's say pre-ancient history and stuff like that, exploring that whole thing. You haven't been interested in that, delving into that kind of interpret. I mean, you did in sort of well, I don't know if in Resurrection Wager you kind of
Right.
went a
And
little
there
bit
we
to
there we
sort of
did. We went back and we viewed history, and we, studied and examined the times. And so that's the only one where there has been an intentional studying of the history. We guess we did that a little in Shattered Time, with Daniel's interest in, medieval times and his choice to go back there and try to make trades. And so we do a little there, but not to any great depth.
Right. Is that intentional? As a sort of, you think it'll bog down the story that you want to tell? Or is just
It just didn't, fit in with what the story I was telling at the time.
right, right. Do you watch a lot of the time travel stories that are around? I mean, obviously the Marvel is
I
the one that's been doing big
Right.
multiverse stuff, but
I did see those. I try not, because I write a lot of time travel. I try not to watch a lot of time travel because I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to see something and say, "Oh, that's really a good idea," and then the next thing you know, it shows up. Something similar or very similar shows up in my writing. I don't
yeah,
want that type of, even unintentional influence.
yeah, that's an issue for an author, isn't it? You're never quite sure if you've accidentally borrowed something that was sitting residing in your subconscious for a while or
Right.
something.
Yeah. You see a movie and then it's sitting out there, and then you're writing and you don't even realize that you used it.
Yeah.
When I was writing the Resurrection Wager, a friend of mine told me about a story that was similar, and they suggested I read it, and I was like, absolutely not. At least not until this story is done, because
Yeah, I don't
I
want to
don't
know.
want to, if I'm going to go in a direction and then I read it in that story, I'd be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. So I just didn't want it to have any influence one way or the other.
Right, yeah. Have you ever found, having written some of your stories, that you've discovered other stories similar that were written after yours? And not
Yeah,
claiming that they were based
I've
on
had a
yours, but
couple. I've had a couple of others. There've been a number of stories that have come up that were, had similarities to the arc that are out there. But with all of the stories out there, all the movies, all the TV shows that are out there, you know, it's kind of hard to have something that, there isn't something somewhat similar.
right. So, is there anything else you want to tell us about Shattered Time?
No,
So we-
I think it's a fun story. The little bit of feedback that I've gotten in the short time it's been out has been really good. And I would really encourage people to read it and give it a chance. And if you enjoy it, to give it a good review online, because the more reviews I get, the more books I sell. And so that's real helpful.
Definitely, reviews are one of the big currencies for authors, aren't they?
Yes, and it's very difficult to build up a good, number of reviews, when something first comes out.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't have the story cubes like we did in the first time, but I do have the big questions still. So I was going to end on a couple big questions, and then
Yeah.
let you plug your stuff again. And the first one, they're all going to be time travel based. So
Okay.
understandably, not that we haven't talked enough about time travel, but I love talking about time travel as well. So if time travel is possible, then presumably it's already been done and used. That might suggest that we're either living in the best possible timeline, perhaps something akin to Eternity Inc., Asimov's Eternity Inc., where they were trying to create that, or that time has been messed up beyond fixing. So, so which do you think would be more likely?
I would think that things have been messed up. And because I've thought about this concept, when writing time travel. I thought, what if this has already been done? What if we are living in a situation where people from the future changed the past, and it wouldn't have been like it is today if, we really are? And it's like we never would know. And so that was an interesting thing to think about. It might even be an idea that could be used in another story.
Hmm.
Find out that you already are living in an altered time.
The comment you made, we wouldn't ever know. I'm curious about that because I wonder if there is a way, because in your story they do kind of understand that something's happened. And it makes me think of some of the weird things that go on with some of the ancient archaeological sites and archaeological finds that seem to get buried or hidden,
Right.
in some cases by powerful groups. And it makes you wonder, does someone actually know what's happened and they're trying to bury it?
I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but at the same time, it's an interesting idea. The idea of time travel is very frightening, far
Mm.
more so than, I'd make it sound like in a book. In the books, it may sound like it's a great thing, but at the same time, in reality, it would be a very dangerous and, you know, uncontrolled thing that nobody would ever know. If somebody
Yeah.
had changed history before I was ever born, how would anybody know it?
Yeah, playing with the fabric of reality.
Yes.
Just because I was just watching a video recently about I don't know if you've heard of Göbekli Tepe, the Turkish it's an ancient city they found in Turkey that appears to be about 13,000 years old with a level of development similar to ancient Egypt. And the interesting thing is it was discovered in the early 2000s. They started excavating it. They got about 5% done by around 2008, 2010. And then since then, nothing's been done. It's just sitting there. And what's
Hmm.
happened, apparently what happened was that the sort of the rights for control over this were acquired by a conglomerate of companies who claim to have about 15 million to put into this, and they've just sat on it. They paved over parts of it. They put trees over some of it, and they've just put like shelters and tourist areas essentially, and now they've stated that they're not going to bother doing any more excavation and save that for future generations. And that's one of the things that makes me, conspiracy theory, don't know. I'm always questioning myself on how much, but that's a very strange thing when I see that
Yeah,
that someone
that's
doesn't
true.
want to understand our past. But that's one of the things that comes to mind. So I'll move on to question number two then, which is probably one of the more classical time travel questions. Considering the state of the modern world, if you could go back in time to make one change, when would you go back to and what would you change? And I'll make the extra point that you have to go back at least 100 years and you can't pick any events directly related to World War II.
That's interesting because in my next book, that is what they do. They go back and prevent World War II. In the
Okay.
book that I'm writing now, that is what they do. That starts off a string of problems. So beyond further back than that, you really needed to give me some time to think about this before our interview. Um,
Okay.
I do not know. In Shattered Time, they go back and they provide medication to fight against the bubonic plague that wiped out so much of Europe. At the same time, it sounds like such a great thing to do, but then you've got people that shouldn't be alive who are and who are, you know, reproducing with other people that should be with other different people, and you basically reshuffle the population as to who exists. And so if I had the ability to go back, I certainly would not go back and make any major changes because of how much it would cascade through history and the billions of lives that would be impacted.
Right.
It's fun in a story, but to really do it, that's scary. It's
Yeah, as
okay
you
to go back an hour or a couple days. The changes won't be bad, but you go back that far,
because you
it's
mentioned in your thing about the book that there were many more catastrophes that befell humanity because of the changes they made in trying to improve and let's say save humanity.
hmm
In many ways, they made things a lot worse. If I didn't have the last conditions about World War II, would that have changed your answer at all?
if I hadn't just written a story, if I weren't in the middle, I'm about halfway through this book about what would happen if you went back and removed those people that were responsible for World War II
Right.
and took them out. Well, in my story, things actually are worse because of different people with different motivations and different attitudes that come to power, and you ended up with a much more significant problem. And so yeah, no, that would not change anything. I still would certainly stay away from that because, in my mind, I've seen how that can go because I've written about it.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously the one that a huge number of people would choose is to go back and somehow remove that certain character from the picture. But he was largely, as you say, suggest like a focal point of the energies of the time. And that doesn't mean
Right.
there's not going to be another focal point that maybe was even more strategic than him, perhaps, and
Exactly.
would make things go a lot worse. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what happens because in my new book, two people are removed. Um, and yeah, it's interesting what happens.
Hmm.
If you could go back, a few days or a few months or But even if you go back any further than that, you think about here in the United States and the terrorist attack on September 11th in New York and things like that. You know, if you change that, then you've got people who have been born now that wouldn't have been, and how that would completely disrupt so many things. You can say, okay, I'm going to remove something good, or I'm going to remove something terrible, but everybody moving forward's lives are now reshuffled. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
if you go back more than a few days and you're caught, it's going to be a scary thing.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of Galaxy Quest. Have you ever seen Galaxy Quest?
No, I have not.
It's sort of a spoof on Star Trek. It's actually really good. But the funny thing is they had an alien device on their ship that they weren't sure what it did, but turns out it let them go back in time 13 seconds.
Ah,
They had just enough time to reverse one mistake.
and that's about what would be safe. Yeah,
Yeah.
a quick undo.
All right. So the final question then. If time travel is possible, going back kind of to the first question, do you think it might be one of the issues that would be solved, say, in the next 10 years by increasingly powerful AI? And not that it should be, but
Yeah, you're saying would AI lead to time travel?
possibly, yes.
I don't know. I think the whole AI thing is exciting. It's going to have a lot of good and there'll be some bad, but I don't picture it completely reshuffling the world to that degree. It's going to certainly change everybody's lives, but I don't think it's going to bring about crazy things like time travel and those type of things. I'm hoping
Right.
it's never going to be that powerful.
Because I'm wondering, because so my field before I left science was in protein folding. And
No?
that was one of the scientific fields that was solved essentially by AI first, back in 2018, when they had a DeepMind AI that essentially beat all of the humans in the world fairly
Mm,
significantly at the protein folding task. And so my thoughts are that basically what it can do is, sample the huge amount of data and compile things that we miss.
right.
And that's why, so I'm wondering about things like, uh, warp drive, what they're calling warp drive, for example,
Hmm.
which they talk about a bit, and other things. I don't like, I have no idea if time travel is even possible, and I probably hope that it's not.
Right.
But any of those technologies that seem fanciful but may actually be possible, it would seem to me that AI, as it develops, would probably be used intentionally or otherwise to solve some of those problems. And 10 years with AI is a huge amount of time
It
of
depending on
development.
how fast it progresses, certainly. But you take things that human beings have to figure out and learn and study, and you put the power of AI behind it, such as warp drive, for
Mm.
example. And certainly I would think that it would bring about those changes and those understandings and that, much faster. But along the way, you are still going to have actual experiments and you're going to have actual, things developed and built and tested, that and then AI would continue to work and to build upon. But it's not going to suddenly hand you a solution. You're going to have to still, you know, physically test things out and experiment.
And at least pointed in the right direction as well.
Yep, it can certainly clean it up and make things faster.
Yeah, makes me wonder. Actually, just having said that, I wonder if Elon Musk is incorporated AI into the development of his SpaceX program at all to
I don't
help
know. I
with
think
chip
that's
design.
possible, but he certainly came out against it the other day with what Apple's doing. Trying
Yeah,
to incorporate, yeah, that into the AI into their products. He certainly got real upset about that.
yeah. He's an interesting character in this regard because he has been quite a bit quite vocally against AI and cautioning against AI for quite a long time, and yet he co-founded OpenAI,
Right.
which is now one of the leaders in the technology. They're creating an app, I guess, according to their latest one of their latest news feeds, that will allow you to basically talk to the AI and it to describe whatever's around you and communicate to you like a person, using your microphone, using your camera of your phone, etc. And it feels like he's almost instigated the movement towards what he fears, basically, in some ways.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem, to make a lot of sense, the direction, what he's done versus what he's said.
Yeah, and it's weird. Same
But
with Neuralink, which you'll feature in a story I have halfway done. But
okay, yeah,
the idea with Neuralink plus AI, and you're like that almost kind of leads you to potentially a worst case scenario in some ways. I mean, it could be very good for some people, but
yeah.
could be
But
very
once you
terrible
have
in life.
once you have computers controlling minds, then all of a sudden that gets scary.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But people are concerned about AI and they want it banned and all of this, but it's really not it can't happen. Because you're going to
No,
have, even if you ban it in the United States, it's going to be used in other countries, on other continents. And, if it's happening there and not here, it puts, the US or Europe in a situation where now all of a sudden, they're way behind. And so
yeah,
it's almost like as weapon technology expands, if you don't stay with it, all of a sudden you'll be a victim to it. And
yeah.
so AI is going to be the same thing. Everybody's going to need to stay on top of it. And the next Cold War could well be, related to AI technology.
And the thing with AI, because it can move so quickly in its development, um, you can't afford not to, you can't afford to let your, let's say, opposition get ahead of you because you'll
Exactly.
be behind by hundreds of years within a very short amount of time.
Yep.
So you don't really have a choice. Yeah. And basically, the only way you can undo a technology is through entire global annihilation, more or less, isn't it?
That's kind of not the idea. I think that's
No, I don't want
that,
that either.
no.
Let's not go there, hopefully. Well, we'll see. So I guess, yeah, that's about all I had for today. So it has been great chatting with you. But before we go, maybe you can fill us in maybe give us a teaser on the book you're working on now, and then let us know sort of where to find you online and if you'll be at any upcoming events.
Yeah. The book that I'm writing now, it's got a working title of Erased. I don't know if it's going to stay that way, but it's going to be about people with time travel ability who decide to remove certain people from history. They decide amongst themselves who's a problem. So one of them had a best friend who was murdered randomly. And so they went back and they eliminated or killed that person before they could ever, you know, cause any crimes. And it turned out that person had killed multiple people. And now all those people live and they're happy and they have lives and they're like, you know what? We did a good thing. And so they do it a couple more times and look at their results and like, you know what? These, murderers, rapists, or they didn't do these things. And so they get a little bit overconfident and they decide to go after some big name people. Some big name people whose actions, devastated, parts of Europe and in the end the whole world, and remove them. And now all of a sudden we're going back that far, we're reshuffling a lot of history and other people come to power who have even more diabolical ideas about control, and it leads into a large Russian Asian nuclear war that creates all kinds of havoc. And eventually, these people realize what happened, and they're like, oh my gosh, what did we do? And so now they have to go back and pick out and try to adjust things a little here and a little there and see what the change, what's going to happen. And as they go along, they uncover a lot of interesting things and have a lot of interesting challenges before they, think that they've got everything right. Only, even then they'll find out that there are things that they didn't count on.
It's interesting because it's very typical of a certain ideology in a way that and one, I mean, we've experienced one over the last 10 years, but it's not the only ideology that does this. But you get sort of ideas that, oh, we can make a better world if we just fix this a little bit, fix it, and you try to fix that little bit. That's sort of let's say you don't understand nature well enough, so it goes contrary to sort of a
Yeah.
natural structure, and then a little bit falls apart, and you've got to adjust something else, and then you got to adjust something else, and then it just you're constantly like trying to hold together this house of cards that's falling down.
Exactly. And
That's
so, I'm about halfway through it, having a lot of fun with it. I like where it's going so far. So I'm hoping it'll be released in about in a year.
Oh, excellent. Um, you seem, I mean, you like time travel, but you do seem to like enhanced individuals as well. I really do think you should
I do.
give some
I,
thought to superhero story or something.
I
I'm
when
interviewing
I
a guy in two episodes. You should listen to that one when it comes out and see what you
I
think.
will. When I first wrote Alternate Purpose, the main character in there, Devin, he has the ability to heal people by touching them. Well, originally he was going to be able to fly and he was going to be able to do all kinds of things. And then after a while, it became a little bit too much. And so I throttled back what he could do and I wrote the story, around that. But originally he was supposed to have a lot more abilities. And then when I got to Shattered Time, I instead of giving anybody the ability to do a lot of those things, I broke those things up amongst multiple people. And I definitely do enjoy stories where people have enhanced abilities.
Because that's really the interesting part, isn't it? I mean, I think as a group, a group of society, we've kind of come to the point with superhero stories where we're getting a little bored of the Superman type guy, the guy who
Yeah,
has all the powers.
it's been done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's really interesting to see, okay, what would you do if you only had one power?
right.
Like you say, and you've explored some of that. And also the guy I'm going to interview in a couple episodes, he does the same kind of thing. Each person on the team has one power. And it makes it for a challenge and an interesting story. And you seem to have an
You
interest
have to
in
be able to
enhanced
work
people.
together.
So yeah, that'd be interesting to see. But yeah. But I think that's about what we have time for today. So Christopher Coates, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Evan, for having me on your show. It's been a lot of fun.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.